The white grand ballroom shimmered with opulence, its arched ceilings painted with scenes of cherubs and roses, while the golden chandeliers threw their brilliance down upon the floor below. The hum of violins filled the air, weaving a tapestry of sound around the glittering gowns, the gleaming cufflinks, the steady whirl of bodies that moved like waves upon a sea of marble. Laughter rang out in bursts, glasses clinked, conversations braided into one another, and at the center of it all stood a man who seemed somehow apart from his own creation. Alexander Vaughn, titan of industry, whose fortune was built on steel, real estate, and technology, leaned against a marble pillar at the far edge of the ballroom. His face was calm, almost severe, the kind of stillness that came from years of keeping emotions carefully folded away. Guests sought his approval, smiled too brightly when he glanced their way, but he gave them nothing more than a polite nod. To them, he was the host, the benefactor, the untouchable man who had everything. But Alexander's eyes were not on his guests. They were on the small figure beside him, his son Daniel. Daniel was 12, pale and thin, with hair that refused to stay neat, and eyes that seemed far too large for his delicate face. He sat in his wheelchair, his legs covered by a neatly pressed blanket, watching the dancers as though they were a world apart from him. His small hands clenched and unclenched against the armrests, and though he smiled politely when spoken to, his gaze always drifted back to the dancers, the spinning gowns, the effortless grace of people who moved without thinking. Alexander's throat tightened as he followed his son's gaze. He had spared no expense for Daniel's care. Specialists in Switzerland, rehabilitation centers in Boston, the best technology money could buy. Yet none of it had given the boy what he wanted most, the freedom to stand, to move, to belong. That hunger in his son's eyes pierced deeper than any financial loss Alexander had ever endured. And then, as if conjured by fate, she appeared. Maya Williams moved between the glittering guests with quiet efficiency, balancing a tray of crystal flutes filled with champagne. Her uniform was plain, black skirt, white blouse, apron tied at the waist, but there was something in the way she carried herself that felt alive, even among so much opulence. Her skin glowed warm beneath the chandelier's light, her dark curls tied neatly at the back of her head, though a few strands had escaped to frame her face. Her steps were quick but graceful, a rhythm of their own, as though music guided her even when no one else heard it. It was Daniel who noticed her first. His eyes followed her movements, not with the same longing he gave to the dancers, but with a kind of curiosity, as though he sensed she was different. When she paused nearby to rest her tray on a side table, their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. The room swirled around them, oblivious. "Would you like a drink, sir?" she asked gently, her voice low so as not to draw attention. Daniel shook his head. His lips parted, but the words caught in his throat. Finally, in a whisper that trembled, he said, "I wish I could dance." Maya's eyes softened. She glanced at Alexander, who stood a few feet away, lost in his own silence. Then she crouched down until she was eye level with Daniel. "Who says you can't?" Daniel blinked, startled. I can't walk. Not like them." "You don't have to be like them," Maya said, smiling. "Dancing isn't about legs. It's about music. It's about joy. If you have that, then you can dance." Before Daniel could answer, she extended her hand. "Do you trust me?" His small hand slipped into hers, hesitant at first, then firmer. Maya stood slowly, helping him rise from his chair. His legs trembled, his body wavered, but she steadied him with surprising strength. She guided his hands to her waist, resting her own hands on his shoulders to support him. Step by halting step, they began to sway, not across the ballroom's grand floor, but in their own little corner, where the shadows embraced them and the music was theirs alone. Daniel's face lit up. His laughter, bright, clear, unrestrained, burst forth like sunlight breaking through a storm. His feet stumbled, but Maya caught him, guiding him as though the music itself flowed through her into him. They twirled, clumsy yet radiant, their small circle of movement more beautiful than the polished routines at the center of the floor. It was then that Alexander saw. At first, he thought he was imagining it. His son, his fragile, quiet boy, was standing, was moving, was alive with joy in a way Alexander had never seen. The sight struck him like a blow. The ballroom blurred at the edges of his vision. The music dimmed beneath the thunder of his heart. For all his power, all his wealth, he had never been able to give his son this moment. Yet here was a girl, no wealth, no status, no power, who had given it so easily. Guests began to notice. Whispers drifted through the crowd. Some smiled, charmed. Others frowned, disapproving of the break in formality. But none of it mattered to Alexander. His gaze was fixed on Daniel's face, on the joy that transformed him from a fragile child into something radiant, untouchable. Alexander's chest ached. His hand tightened around the glass he held until it trembled. He felt something he had not felt in years, something dangerous, something humbling, gratitude, and beneath it, shame. Shame that he, with all his resources, had never thought to try something as simple as this. As the dance went on, Alexander felt the world shift beneath him, like tectonic plates long still beginning to move. He did not yet know what it meant, only that life would never again look the same. The music played on, violins weaving elegantly through the chatter, but in one corner of the ballroom, time seemed to take on a rhythm of its own. Daniel clung to Maya's hands as though they were lifelines, his laughter carrying like a bell through the gilded air. To him, the polished floors, the glittering gowns, the chandeliers fading into shadow, none of it mattered. He was moving. He was dancing. But to everyone else, the sight was extraordinary. Guests began to notice, their conversations faltering mid-sentence as eyes drifted toward the corner. Fans paused mid-wave. Champagne glasses lowered. For a moment, the spectacle of wealth and prestige that had filled the night was eclipsed by the image of a frail boy leaning on a waitress, swaying to the music with all the awkwardness and all the joy of a miracle unfolding. Some smiled warmly, whispering about how sweet the boy looked, how brave. Others exchanged wary glances, brows knitting with disapproval. A waitress holding a boy? Was that proper? Wasn't it unbecoming? Guests who had lived their lives bound by rules of decorum bristled at the breach of etiquette. A billionaire's son and a girl from the serving staff. It was a pairing they did not know how to fit into their world of marble and gold. Alexander felt the weight of every glance. Years of social maneuvering had taught him to sense judgment even before it was spoken. Yet he could not bring himself to look away. His son's smile pinned him in place. Daniel's joy had stripped away his armor, left him raw. Still, he saw the whispers. He heard them. "Unseemly," hissed one woman in pearls. "Touching, but dangerous," muttered a man who ran one of Alexander's subsidiary companies. "Shouldn't someone stop this?" another guest whispered. The words were like needles pricking at Alexander's composure. His instinct, the instinct of a man who had built and maintained an empire, was to control, to extinguish anything that could be seen as a scandal. A waitress overstepping, a boy exposed, a host who appeared weak. All of it was unacceptable. His reputation was not built on sentiment, but on command. Yet when he stepped forward, the command on his lips turned to ash. Daniel's eyes, shining, alive, filled with something he had not seen in years, caught his. And Alexander froze. He could not stop it. He could not stop him. Maya guided Daniel back into his chair, only when his trembling legs could no longer hold him. She adjusted the blanket over his lap with careful hands, her touch respectful but tender, as though he were her own younger brother. Daniel was still laughing, cheeks flushed, eyes alight. "I danced, father," he whispered, as though confessing a secret too wonderful to believe. "Did you see?" "I danced." Alexander's throat tightened. He nodded once, curtly, because words were dangerous. He could feel his control slipping, and control was everything. The crowd began to disperse, attention drawn back to the orchestra, the champagne, the endless swirl of politeness. But the moment had already lodged itself deep within the marrow of the evening. Nothing would erase it. When Maya straightened, her eyes met Alexander's. She hesitated, as though unsure whether she had crossed a line. She lowered her gaze quickly and turned to retrieve her tray, blending back into the army of staff moving silently among the glittering guests. But Alexander's gaze followed her. He found her again near the banquet table, refilling glasses with brisk efficiency. She did not look his way, though he knew she felt the weight of his presence. He crossed the room, each step measured, commanding. The crowd parted instinctively as though some unspoken current warned them not to stand in his way. "Maya, isn't it?" His voice was low, deliberate. She stiffened, her hand tightening around the neck of a champagne bottle before she set it down. Slowly, she turned. Yes, sir. You were with my son. It was not quite a question, not quite an accusation. Yes, she said carefully, though her chin lifted a fraction. He wanted to dance. She straightened instantly. The other workers glanced at one another nervously before slipping away, leaving the two of them alone among stacks of trays and empty glasses. Sir, she said, cautious but steady. Alexander studied her in silence for a moment. The words that pressed at his throat were not ones he was used to speaking. Gratitude did not come easily to a man who bought loyalty and demanded respect, but tonight had stripped him of the illusions he had lived by for decades. You gave my son something tonight, he said finally, his voice low. Something I could not. I don't know how to repay that. Maya shook her head. You don't need to repay me. He just needed someone to believe in him for a few minutes. Her simplicity unsettled him again. No ambition, no request, no attempt to use this moment to her advantage. It was rare, rarer than diamonds in his world. Still, Alexander pressed, I would like to help you. Tell me what you want. Tuition? A job? A scholarship? Money? Maya's lips curved into a small smile, but it was tinged with sadness. You think money is the only kind of help a person can need? The words stung, though she had not meant them cruelly. He opened his mouth to reply, then closed it. She was right. I work here because I need the wages, yes, she continued, her voice soft but unwavering. But what I earn doesn't stay with me. Every paycheck goes where it belongs, to children who have less than I ever did. To orphanages, to shelters, to classrooms that need books. I've been doing it since I was 16. Alexander blinked. You give it away? All of it? She nodded. What I need is simple. A roof, food, my classes. The rest, it can change someone's life. It already has. For the first time in years, Alexander was at a loss for words. He thought of his own empire, the billions sitting in vaults and stocks, the art he collected and barely glanced at, the mansions he built only to leave empty. And here was this girl, 19 years old, carrying trays in a borrowed uniform, already richer in ways he had never been. You don't even keep any for yourself? He asked, almost incredulous. Maya's smile deepened. I have enough. That's more than most people in this world can say. And when I see a child smile because they have shoes or a bed or a book they dreamed of reading, that's worth more than anything. Alexander felt his chest tighten. Her words stripped him bare, laid him open in ways boardroom battles and hostile takeovers never could. This girl had no empire, no armies of lawyers, no skyscrapers bearing her name. And yet she had something greater. He bowed his head slightly, an instinct that shocked even himself. Then you are already the richest person in this room, he murmured. Maya tilted her head, surprised at the softness in his tone. But she only gave a small nod, accepting his words without pride. Daniel stirred in his chair then, his eyes fluttering open. Father? He whispered sleepily. Alexander knelt beside him at once, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. I'm here, Daniel. The boy blinked, then turned his gaze toward Maya. A faint smile curved his lips. Did we really dance? Or was it a dream? You really danced, Maya said gently. Daniel sighed happily, drifting back into slumber. Alexander looked up at her again. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that the world had shifted tonight, not just for Daniel, but for Alexander as well. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, reverent. You've given me more than I can ever repay, but I will not forget it. Maya only smiled, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. Just remember your son's smile tonight. Mr. Vaughn, that's all the repayment I need. And with that, she turned back to her work, stacking trays as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But Alexander knew better. He wheeled his sleeping son toward the door, the great chandeliers dimming behind him. The guests would forget this night, as they forgot all nights, but he would not. His empire suddenly felt fragile, small, compared to the wealth he had just witnessed. For in the end, it was not the billionaire nor the glittering guests who held the greatest riches. It was the young black girl in the waitress uniform, already richer than them all, because she gave everything she earned to orphanages, to shelters, to good and noble work that carried light into the darkest corners of the world. And Alexander Vaughn, for the first time in his life, felt the stirring of envy for a kind of wealth he had never known.